And I actually went back and looked, because of all these narratives that are going crazy online, about when I told my mom I wasn't going to play the game. 4:47, and you guys found out at 5:20. So one of the most important people in my life found out 40 minutes before you guys.
There are moments in professional sports that transcend the final score. Moments where the context surrounding the game matters just as much as what happens on the hardwood. Moments where a superstar arrives carrying something heavier than a game plan, something more volatile than competitive preparation. Something that, when properly channeled, transforms an ordinary regular season contest into a defining chapter of an athlete's legacy. Friday night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse was one of those moments. Caitlyn Clark walked into that building carrying an entire week's worth of manufactured controversy, media distortion, and outright factual dishonesty on her shoulders. She had spent days watching reporters, analysts, and online personalities twist a simple, straightforward injury situation into a conspiratorial narrative designed to suggest deception, unprofessionalism, and a lack of transparency from both Clark and the Indiana Fever organization. And she was done, not frustrated, not mildly irritated, not the kind of professionally composed displeasure that athletes typically display at press conference podiums when they want to appear above the noise without fully engaging with it. She was completely, unapologetically, and productively furious. What followed over the next 24 hours was one of the most compelling two-act performances in recent WNBA history. First came the press conference, where Clark dismantled the false narrative with cold, precise, mathematical clarity. Then came the game itself, a 90-82 Indiana Fever victory over the Golden State Valkyries, where she delivered what
they kind of did everything they could to stop Caitlyn. And you got to give Nicas credit, because she is the guard stopper. That's her thing. That's her thing. She's able to stop guards. And she did everything to try to stop Caitlyn. It didn't work.
Many observers are already calling the most ruthless, vindicating, and psychologically charged performance of her entire professional career. This is the complete story of that night. The anger, the altercation, the adjustments, and the absolute domination that followed. Before a single jump ball was tossed, before the Valkyries could execute a single element of their meticulously constructed defensive scheme, Caitlyn Clark had already won the most important battle of the week. She sat at the podium the day before tip-off, and she did not mince words. She did not offer diplomatic non-answers. She did not smile through clenched teeth and say something polished about focusing on basketball and ignoring distractions. She went directly at the narrative, with timestamps. The suggestion circulating across sports media and social platforms was that the Indiana Fever had somehow mismanaged or deliberately obscured information regarding Clark's back injury status. Reporters and commentators were insinuating that the organization had been strategically deceptive, that Clark herself had been less than forthcoming, and that the timeline of information disclosure pointed to something suspicious. Clark corrected that suggestion with a single, devastating piece of evidence. She told the room, and more importantly the cameras streaming the press conference to an enormous online audience, that she had personally gone back and checked the exact timeline. Her mother, one of the most important people in her life, found out that Clark would not be playing.
Before we get to the Gabby Williams, what?
Right before the break, we got a little John going on. Caitlyn says, "Hey,
Look,
you and me, Hayes, you
Kelly,
and me."
look at Caitlyn blowing her kisses. Caitlyn blew her kisses, bro. Look. So no, it was Janelle Salon and Caitlyn Clark. Referees had to step in. Look at Caitlyn, guys.
At 4:47 in the afternoon. The media found out at 5:20. That is a window of 33 minutes. Think about that for a moment. The conspiracy theory being aggressively circulated required people to believe that a young woman who tells her own mother she cannot play in a basketball game 33 minutes before informing the press was somehow engaged in a sophisticated cover-up. The timeline was not just tight. It was so compressed that it rendered the entire manufactured narrative not merely inaccurate but genuinely absurd. This was not a defensive, rattled athlete trying to explain herself. This was a composed, methodical competitor who had done her homework, checked her facts, and arrived prepared to surgically destroy a false story with the most powerful weapon available to her, the actual truth. She was angrier at that podium than she had been at any press conference during the entire season. And every person in that room, every camera operator, every reporter, every analyst watching the stream could feel it. This was not background noise to her. This was personal, and she was going to respond to it in the only way that truly matters in professional sports. On the court, Natalie Nicas is not a coach who walks into road games without a plan. She's one of the most analytically sophisticated defensive minds operating in the WNBA today, with a coaching resume that includes time on the staff of the Golden State Warriors organization in the NBA. She studies film with an almost obsessive commitment to detail, and she had spent considerable time preparing a specific defensive approach for this particular matchup. The scheme was built around a simple, brutal premise. Caitlyn Clark has specific offensive weapons that, when she can access them comfortably, make her effectively unguardable. The left step-back jumper. The logo three-pointer that she launches from distances most professional players would not even consider attempting in a game situation. The hesitation dribble that creates just enough separation to generate a clean look on the pull-up jumper. Nicas had studied all of it. She knew the mechanics, the tendencies, the preferred spots on the floor, the situations where Clark is most dangerous.
It's damn near altering the game, bro. It's just damn near altering the game. Let me pull this up real quick. Let me pull the game cast back up real quick. So it's another timeout. So the Fever call a full time. Why would Stephanie White call a timeout? I don't know what happened. I got to see what happened, guys.
And the defensive coverage is most likely to disrupt her rhythm. Her counter scheme was built on physicality. Constant, relentless, borderline sanctioned physical disruption at every single catch. Multiple bodies rotating to Clark, denying her comfortable positions, making every possession a genuine physical negotiation just to secure the basketball cleanly. The explicit goal was not to neutralize Clark, because any coach in this league who genuinely believes they can neutralize Caitlyn Clark completely is probably losing that game. The goal was to disrupt her rhythm, tax her physically, and keep her from settling into the kind of comfortable, flowing offensive basketball where she becomes truly catastrophic to defend. The first half must be understood as a legitimate partial success for the Valkyries. The physicality worked to some degree. It disrupted timing. It made catches difficult. It created enough friction in Clark's offensive process that the Fever did not immediately pull away and turn the game into the blowout that Indiana's best basketball is capable of producing. The Valkyries threw everything they had at her. Guards shadowed her relentlessly. Forwards helped early and often. The scheme was communicative, coordinated, and smart. But there was a fatal flaw baked into the entire approach, and it had nothing to do with basketball IQ or scheme design. The flaw was that the scheme required Caitlyn Clark to respond to adversity by shrinking, by becoming tentative, by allowing the physical discomfort to erode her competitive confidence until she started making passive decisions, settling for easier but less efficient options, and gradually removing herself as the dominant offensive force. And Caitlyn Clark does not shrink. Toward the end of the first half, with the tension between the two teams reaching a level that the entire arena could physically feel, everything snapped in a single moment. Clark put her head down and attacked the basket with the kind of aggressive, reckless conviction that only comes from a player who has genuinely run out of patience. She drove hard, collided with contact, and aggressively swatted at a loose ball in the arms of Valkyries forward Janelle Salon. The extra contact was significant. Salon took immediate, emphatic exception to it. She stepped directly into Clark's face. Clark did not retreat. The two of them engaged in a fierce, sustained verbal exchange that drew both benches toward the hardwood. Veronica Burton had to physically intervene to create separation between the two players before the situation escalated further. The officials assessed double technical fouls, one for Clark and one for Salon, and both teams went into the locker room at halftime carrying the weight of a game that felt like it was about to boil over completely. The mainstream basketball conversation spent considerable time analyzing the technical foul as a problem for Clark, as a moment of lost composure, as evidence that the physicality had successfully gotten into her head. They had it exactly backwards. People who understand elite competitive psychology understand that a player like Caitlyn Clark does not arbitrarily initiate physical confrontations. She is not a player who picks petty fights for the sake of displaying toughness. She is a player who absorbs pressure, internalizes it, compresses it, and eventually weaponizes it. The altercation with Salon did not represent a breakdown in Clark's mental approach to the game. It represented the ignition point of something far more dangerous for the Golden State Valkyries than a composed, measured Caitlyn Clark operating within herself. That technical foul, combined with the exhausting week of media lies about the injury timeline, combined with the relentless physical punishment she had absorbed throughout the entire first half, created something that elite athletes reach only occasionally, and that opposing teams should genuinely fear when it happens. It created a completely unleashed Caitlyn Clark. You do not wear down a generational competitor with cheap shots and manufactured narratives. You simply remove the last remaining filter between her natural ability and its most extreme, most ruthless expression. You awaken the monster. Caitlyn Clark brought the basketball up the court in the third quarter, surveyed the defense in front of her, and made a decision that communicated everything about her psychological state in a single action. She stopped at the logo, 33 feet from the basket, looked at the defense and pulled up. Not a hesitation, not a moment of calculation or second guessing. A cold, clean, aggressive pull-up three-pointer from a distance that most professional basketball players in the world would never attempt in a game-deciding moment on their home floor in front of their own crowd. The shot connected. Tie game at 48. But what happened immediately afterward told the more important story. Clark did not quietly jog back on defense with the satisfied, understated expression of a player who had executed a designed play. She turned directly to Valkyries veteran guard Tiffany Hayes, stepped into her personal space, and talked trash, not maliciously, not in a way that crossed any line of genuine disrespect between competitors, but in the precise, terrifying way that elite athletes who genuinely respect each other communicate in the middle of a battle that actually matters at the highest level. Hayes said something back. The exchange was brief, charged, and utterly electric. Gainbridge Fieldhouse erupted. That moment, the Logo 3 followed immediately by the cold-blooded verbal exchange with a seasoned professional who has been in this league long enough to have seen everything, was not a departure from who Caitlyn Clark is. It was the purest, most unfiltered version of exactly who she is. It was an on-court exorcism. She was physically expelling everything, the media distortions, the injury timeline conspiracy theories, the week of sanctioned physical punishment from Nicas's defensive scheme, every single ounce of accumulated frustration, and converting it directly into basketball excellence. The trash talk was not aggression for its own sake. It was the release valve on a pressure system that had been building all week long, and the energy that came flooding out of it powered one of the most dominant second-half performances the Indiana Fever have produced this season. Once Clark hit that Logo 3 and the crowd found its voice, and the momentum tilted definitively toward Indiana, the entire structural integrity of Natalie Nicas's defensive scheme began to fracture. The scheme was built on the premise that constant physicality and multiple defenders rotating to Clark would keep her uncomfortable and prevent her from finding her rhythm. What the scheme could not account for was the moment Clark stopped caring about comfort and started operating purely on competitive instinct and anger-fueled aggression. Because the second the defensive coverage had to overextend to deal with the Logo 3 range, passing lanes cracked open. The second Clark started attacking those lanes with the kind of surgical precision that comes from a genuine basketball savant reading a defense in real time, the rotation breakdowns began cascading throughout the entire Golden State system. Clark finished the night with 22 points, 9 assists, and 4 made three-pointers on 9 attempts. She played 32 hard physical minutes. The numbers are impressive in isolation. But numbers rarely capture the way a performance actually felt, and this performance felt like something that should be archived and studied. The most important beneficiary of Clark's second-half aggression was Aaliyah Boston, who delivered what was arguably the most quietly dominant individual performance the Indiana Fever franchise has produced in recent memory. Boston finished with 20 points on an efficient 8 of 15 shooting and an absolutely stunning 16 rebounds. When Clark is running the transition game and finding Boston in stride with precision passes that split coverages that were designed to stop the pass before it arrives, this version of the Indiana Fever is genuinely terrifying. The 90-82 final score does not fully communicate the decisive nature of the second half. The Valkyries could not solve the adjustments. They could not find a defensive answer for a player who had already absorbed their most physical, most aggressive, most sophisticated game plan and was now operating completely beyond its reach. The most credible validation of what Caitlyn Clark accomplished Friday night did not come from Indiana Fever fans, from Clark's teammates, or from the analysts already in her corner. It came from Natalie Nicas. After the final buzzer, the opposing head coach stood in front of cameras and microphones and was brutally, admirably honest about what she had witnessed. Nicas publicly acknowledged that Clark had made the impossible adjustments in real time. that she had diagnosed the defensive scheme, identified its microscopic vulnerabilities, and exploited them with a precision and intelligence that the Valkyries simply had not been able to adequately prepare for. Nicas noted that her team had done everything possible to slow Clark down. She credited her own defensive personnel, particularly her primary guard defender, for doing everything within her capability to disrupt Clark's rhythm and limit her comfort. And then she acknowledged, with the honest clarity of a coach who understands the game at the highest level, that it had not been enough, because you can prepare for the left step back. You can design rotations that account for the logo 3. You can build an entire defensive scheme around disrupting the hesitation dribble and the pull-up jumper. What you cannot prepare for is a basketball genius who diagnoses your defensive weaknesses in real time, makes instantaneous adjustments during the flow of the game, and then surgically, methodically dismantles the thing you spent the entire week building. That is not a skill that shows up fully in a box score. It is the hallmark of a genuinely elite generational player, not just a scorer. Not just a shooter. A basketball intelligence that operates at a level that defensive schemes, no matter how carefully constructed, simply cannot permanently contain. The Indiana Fever moved to 4-2 following this victory. Caitlyn Clark is completely healthy. Aaliyah Boston just delivered the best performance of her current season. The momentum surrounding this team has shifted in a direction that should make every other franchise in this league genuinely uncomfortable. But beyond the standings, beyond the advanced metrics, beyond the highlight reel moments and the statistical masterpiece Clark produced, the most important thing that happened Friday night was the statement. Not a statement in the press, not a social media post, not a carefully crafted public relations response to the fabricated injury timeline controversy. A statement delivered in the only language that actually matters in professional sports. 47 minutes of basketball that rendered every manufactured narrative completely irrelevant. Caitlyn Clark arrived at Gainbridge Fieldhouse carrying an entire week of dishonest media coverage, physical punishment, relentless defensive harassment, and the kind of sustained psychological pressure that genuinely breaks lesser competitors. She took all of it, and she weaponized every single ounce. The logo 3 was the punctuation mark. The trash talk with Tiffany Hayes was the exclamation point. The 9 assists and the complete second-half dismantling of one of the most carefully constructed defensive schemes she has faced this season was the full argument, constructed and delivered flawlessly in front of everyone who needed to see it. This is what Caitlyn Clark actually is. Not the load-managed version. Not the protected, carefully scheduled limited minutes version. The angry, locked-in, completely focused, trash-talking, logo 3 hitting, scheme-destroying, team-elevating apex competitor who has the rare and terrifying ability to transform personal adversity into professional excellence. Every executive in this league should be paying attention. Every defensive coordinator should be watching the film and asking themselves difficult questions about what they will do differently when Clark comes to their building. Because Friday night was not an outlier. It was a preview, and the Indiana Fever are just getting started. Drop your take in the comments. Was this the best performance of Caitlyn Clark's professional career? Stay locked with my channel Simply Explained for more updates.